Welcome to Lex Talk Real Estate, a podcast about real estate in Central Kentucky. Although much of what we talk about does have to do with our local real estate market, we also talk about trends that impact the national real estate market as well. I'm Nick Edgerly, your host and loan officer in my community. Today's a special episode because I'm joined by Steve Farnau. And Steve, if you want to give your little intro too.
I'm really excited to be here on the podcast today, Nick. Thanks so much. And also, welcome. We are back in the Bluegrass again today. We're going to be kind of co-hosting these today for our two channels. And my channel is Back in the Bluegrass with Steve Farnau, where we talk about kind of all things living, working, playing in Central Kentucky in the Bluegrass region and how it pertains to real estate. So I'm excited to be on here and having a conversation today. It's awesome.
This is a first in my podcast history because we're doing a collaborative effort. So
it's fantastic.
Honored to have you on. Well, Steve, I think you have an interesting background. I think, given kind of your academic career, I would say, and then kind of how you got into real estate. I think it's all very interesting. So,
well, thanks.
If you could give kind of a little bit of an intro, I would love to hear.
I don't know if it's as interesting as you make it out to be, but my background is college athletics primarily, and spent over 20 years about coaching swimming and at the collegiate level and in the Big Ten, especially at the University of Illinois. And so, swimming and coaching was a big part of my life for up until 2013 when we left Champaign, Illinois, and followed my wife on her journey in academia to her first professorship at East Carolina University. And we were down there for 5 years, and I got to do a couple different interesting things, from working for Dolphin Swimwear to getting fired by Dolphin Swimwear to all kinds of interesting jobs along the way, working in the restaurant business for a little bit. And we always wanted to come back to Lexington, I think, and find a home base closer to family, which we were able to do. In 2019, we made the move back to Lexington, and I quickly realized that I did not want to continue in the path I'd been on, and was lucky enough to have Myrna Downing, who is one of the founding members of our brokerage here at Keller Williams Bluegrass, who had been my parents' agent for a long time and had worked with my parents in education as a teacher at my dad's school, was helping us find our house. And I was like, this is something that I can't believe I hadn't thought about before. And, within a few months of that conversation, I was licensed in 2019.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
It's 6 years coming up now, which is truly remarkable. And it has been an interesting and wild time in real estate, as we all know, with COVID and all the craziness that was going on during that period. But it has been an interesting learning experience, and nothing but good for the most part. And, I think that I feel very, very blessed and very lucky to be able to sit here with you and have a conversation about this thing that we do now that I think is really important.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I had a podcast this morning about COVID, so it's very top of mind. Mm-hmm. Not about COVID, about the real estate market during COVID.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting because, you came on in 2019, and, you went from a very stable market. Rates were pretty stable as a general rule. The real estate market was good. It was stable, but not on fire. And then you experience what most agents don't.
Right. So. It was, looking back, it was really I think it's good and bad. I think that because it became, 2020 and 21, 22 were three of the busiest, highest volume years of real estate sales in the country ever. I think we topped 6 million sales in 2021, and it was amazing, right? Incredible amount of sales. And for a new agent who didn't really know much, it gave us a chance to have a lot of repetition. As we know, everybody was writing multiple offers on every house you could for buyers. And so you got a lot of practice in understanding that. And I think where it maybe has hurt some agents is that business was just falling out of the trees, right? It was easy. And I think building a sustainable real estate business in normal, balanced markets, or even strange markets that we're seeing right now, requires some different skill sets that we were kind of learning during COVID. But for me, it's been great, and always just trying to get a little bit better and take care of my clients and do it well. So yeah, it's a different time during COVID, and now I think we're seeing some sticker shock on interest rates are starting to settle down a little bit maybe. And I think today had dropped just a little bit, like 6.8 or something like that today as we talk. On May 1st, I think is our date today. So yeah, it's been an interesting kind of transition out of COVID, rates up, and now kind of trying to find some new normal.
Yeah. So. Well, and a follow-up question I would ask is, to your point, you came into this and then almost immediately had the sugar rush of low interest rates.
Yeah.
you could be a loan officer or a realtor and just business flew from, it came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Well, you fast forward a couple of years and, you went from stable market to insane, wonderful, falling from the sky market to one of the harder markets in 20 to 30 years. So what I'd ask you is, you've obviously made the cut. In other words, this has worked well for you to date. What's that magic for you? Or in other words, what's kept you going when it's no longer like super easy like this?
I mean, I'm being from Lexington and growing up here, I have a really, strong sphere and network of family and friends that I grew up with and that are connected to me through my parents and through my family here. So I think that certainly makes a big impact for me and is a big source of my business and the people that I work with. But I think that it's just consistent connecting, with my people that I've done business with in the past few years, and just growing in that kind of steady, consistent outreach and just making sure that I'm staying top of mind and, around so that my people, hey, oh yeah, let's go hang out with Steve on, we do some events each year, a few events, and I'm looking forward to really cranking those up this year. I'll probably mention one later before we get off. It'll be fun. But I think for me, it's a combination of that sphere. I have a lot of great tools that I have access to here at Keller Williams, which has been helpful. But I think it's just that being from here and that local just being connected, I think is a big part of it.
Well, and I think, last kind of follow-up question to your story, you've got a positive mental attitude that, anybody who spends a couple minutes with you can tell. And, this is a business that will, chew you out and spit you out, spit you out. It's a business that is so, self-driven, meaning you go out there and nothing's really given to you.
That's right.
You can have a deal fall apart for all sorts of reasons. I mean, buyer quits, buys a boat, all sorts of things. How do you keep that positive mental attitude going when in an environment that is very uncertain day to day?
Well, thank you for the positive energy there. I think that this job, and it's certainly, I think if you look at statistics on how many people that get into real estate only last for a few years before they say, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And for me, it has to do with, it's been a financially, positive thing for me and my family, which continues to help motivate. But I also think that you get to choose each day, the attitude, right, that we go, and things are going to happen, stuff that's crappy that you don't like that might make you frustrated. But I think generally I'm a pretty upbeat person. And so I try not to, there's going to be lots of no's before you get those yeses, as you know. But I think, working with people that you enjoy and doing things in that process that you enjoy doing, for the dreaded word of lead generation or whatever, is one of those things that, you just kind of become comfortable with the process a little bit, I think. And, you can't allow some of the, I get to choose my attitude. Somebody else doesn't get to force me into an attitude, right? I think that's it. I've been into some of the Stoic philosophies for the last few years, and I think that helps too, some of that approach to things. And so I don't know. I think it's just take it a day at a time, and there's going to be some crappy days, right? You might have some days you're like, damn it, I want to go back to bed, But I think for the most part, that's not the case. So.
Yeah. Well, so shifting gears, talking, real estate, it's, the time of this recording, it is May 1st,
2025.
So we are, 4 months down for the year, which is wild. Already feels a little warm outside, but
finally,
not too bad so far. So what I'd ask is, it's also an interesting time, and I stay away from politics on the show, but, I think anybody who looks at what's going on right now, it is a very uncertain time. And a lot of buyers are on the fence right now. And, there could be for any number of reasons. I've heard it said the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And I think that philosophy in housing works really well. So, in your view, why is the defensive home ownership, why is that still a thing? Why still purchase?
Well, there are so many benefits to owning a home. And I think especially for the average person living in Central Kentucky, owning a home is one of the most feasible, doable, and approachable things that you can do with a little planning and a little support, whether you're a first-time home buyer just trying to figure this out, or whether you're a seasoned homeowner that has done this many times, owning real estate, owning property is, one of, if not the best way to build a lot of equity and a lot of personal wealth and stability for you and your family. I really believe that. And I think that it allows you to do some things that if you don't own a home, makes it really challenging to do. And it may not be for everyone. I'm sure there's folks out there, no, I'm never going to own a home. And that's fine. But I do think that there are opportunities in buying a home and owning your own home, and how that can kind of grow into something even more amazing for building long-term wealth and financial security, which is, I think, really important. And in this day and age feels really important, right? Like, how can I insulate myself from some of the crazy? And I think that, having a house that's yours and that you are in charge of and can control is great. Now, some people are like, well, there's yard work, and there's lots of things you can naysay about it. But for the most part, the benefits, I think, far outweigh any of the negatives, without doubt.
So you had mentioned it is a turbulent time, and,
Mm-hmm.
Who knows, that might change tomorrow, or it might get worse tomorrow. You never know, right?
Yes.
But, with some of the tariffs, things like that, it is an uncertain time, and there are buyers.
Gotta check my Amazon tariff calculator. Hold on. No.
Boy, I heard all the story on that one, but, again, staying out of the politics. But so what I think is interesting is, you had mentioned homeownership is an insulation to some of the crazy, or in other
Mm-hmm.
words, it is a turbulent time in the economy right now, but having a roof over your head that's yours provides some stability. Talk to me a little bit about why.
Well, I think there's been a lot of talk in the media about, all these foreclosures are going to start happening again. We're going to see the same kind of devastation we saw in the Great Recession with, people losing their homes and home prices tanking and crashing. And that's not happening right now. We still see foreclosures are at all-time lows and very, very, very low and way below pre-Great Recession numbers. And I know that in this area here in Central Kentucky, we traditionally have been able to not see the incredibly high and low, price drops and craziness that happens. It's much more stable in this type of town. Lexington has, the universities here. There's incredible hospitals and education systems in and around the area, plus some pretty large industry that keep it anchored and pretty stable. So there's no doubt that here in this area that there is some significant stability in the market, in real estate especially, that can kind of keep you safe from some of this stuff. And we know that in the last 5 or 6 years that the equity that homeowners have in their homes is way more than it was prior to the Great Recession, which is insulating folks even more from some of that financial danger that might be out there for someone who's lost a job or whatever may happen. Having that house that's paid off or is close to or has some equity that you can draw from until you find your next job is a powerful thing, and a pretty, maybe helps you sleep at night. So,
let's talk equity for a minute, because equity is interesting that people who might have been on the fence back in 2020, you look at some of the stats between especially in Fayette County, if you would have bought a home and done nothing to it, literally just mow the yard, basic maintenance, I don't know the number, but I think it's 30 to 40%, growth, if not more, in 5 years. So what I'd ask you is, how does that equity, and if you have the number, I'd be curious.
It was at one time in Kentucky, I think that toward the end of the biggest gains out of COVID, we were over 50, it's like 55, 56% in Kentucky, and nationwide it was very close to that as well. It was really, really high appreciation in just a short period of time. It was something, I was looking at some numbers, and the home prices in 2023 at this time of year, looking back like March over March, had jumped from 240 in our MLS to 269 in just a year. And so that gives you, in 23 to 24, and I've been much creepier the last year, only about $1,000 or so increase, but still going up. So, the prices, there's still a scarcity of homes out there for buyers, and a lot of folks sitting on those nice, low interest rates are hesitant to pull the trigger if they don't absolutely have to. Yeah. So if you bought a house in 2019, like I did, that house is appreciated in value tremendously in that period of time. And you can say, oh, well, that timing will never come again. I've missed my chance, right? Which I think a lot of people start to say, but this is the angle, right, that it's going, right? So you always, when's the best time to buy? Right now, just like the tree. If you haven't planted it 20 years ago, get out there and put one in the ground today. So
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Well, how does that equity make a difference for a family? So, and I say that because, you think about the average American worker gets, 3 to 5% increases, merit increases per year.
That may be even high.
Yeah, exactly. And oftentimes living paycheck to paycheck, the labor market's starting to slow.
Mm-hmm.
Point being is, if you are renting, you can be very much so trapped unless you work second jobs, things like that. How does equity help, kind of naturally grow something that you're already doing and give families some options?
When you look at, renting versus owning and putting that money into a rental payment every month, you're paying for that right to live there. And with a house that you own, you're paying for the bank, the mortgage, and you're also slowly owning that space. And eventually that will be yours, and you will not have to pay to live there. It'll be yours. And other than, taxes and insurance, you're going to be in pretty good shape. And I think having that equity growing and building gives you the ability to, buy a car if you need to do some renovations, to pay for an emergency medical situation if that might come up. It gives you some financial security, and it's not free, right? You have to pay interest on that and eventually pay it back into the loan on the house. But I think that it gives you a little bit of flexibility to do something like maybe even buy another property, right? And so I think there's ways to use that equity that is only kind of limited by your imagination. Like, I think have some fun with it and see how you can use it. And I think that is, it's a very powerful tool to start your wealth building journey with that equity in the home.
That's a wrap on part 1 of our conversation with Steve. We covered a lot, from market noise to mindset, and we're just getting started. Be sure to tune in next week for part 2, where we dive deeper into how smart homeownership can be your best hedge in today's economy. Enjoy your day. Nick Edgerly and Steve Farnau are not affiliated. Nick Edgerly, NMLS number 1912730. This is not a commitment to lend. The content on this podcast is intended to be educational in nature, and opinions are those of the individuals, not Ruoff Mortgage. Please consult with a financial, legal, or other licensed professional before acting on anything you hear or see in the content. The information we share is general in nature, and examples are merely illustrative. Financing terms and scenarios may not be available currently. NMLsConsumerAccess.org.